Hello, I'm Jessica Hastings. I lead analytics at Betterment. I am here to be the first guinea pig to record myself making a recipe. I really like cooking. I don't have a lot of camera experience, so bear with me on that. This is one of my favorite recipes in general, and it tends to be a really easy one to have pantry items around for. So hopefully many of these things are something that you've already acquired. I'll talk through some ways that you can modify this recipe if you don't have one particular thing, and some different things that I've experimented with. And then, yeah, hope you like it and hopefully it's useful during this crazy time, but also in the future. In terms of the inspiration, it comes from this Gwyneth Paltrow cookbook. It's all good. I put that in air quotes because actually it's co-written with Julia Turshen, and from what I understand, she actually wrote the cookbook, and Gwyneth Paltrow just lent her name and brand. Can take that conversation up another time. So the recipe itself is a turkey and black bean chili with sweet potatoes. And it's super easy to modify to be vegetarian or even vegan if you like as well. And you will hear cats in the background. My apologies. It's got awesome like vegetables and stuff, but you could definitely use some frozen things too. And then it actually has a lot of protein. Okay, so first step is to preheat your oven to 400 degrees. Because we're going to roast some sweet potatoes. Roasting them definitely helps to really bring out extra flavor versus just using something that's already been cooked or boiled or something out of the freezer. But if you didn't want to deal with roasting something, or if you had some frozen butternut squash or something like that in your freezer, it would definitely be totally fine to use that instead. Just the depth of flavor is going to come from roasting. So it's a nice thing to do, and it's pretty easy. So first step is actually to wash and peel and then chop the sweet potatoes. You need 2, roughly. The nice thing about a chili and cooking in general is that your amounts can be pretty imprecise. So I've got 1 not so big sweet potato and 1 bigger sweet potato from a recent CSA. But again, the amounts are pretty imprecise, so go with what you have. So yeah, peel. Hopefully you know how to do that. I'm gonna pause for a second while I do that and then we'll come back. All right, now we're gonna chop some vegetables. So I peeled my sweet potatoes. I don't tend to be too concerned about getting all of the peel off. And if you really wanted to, you could even leave it on. But it's a nice smoother texture if you do peel it. And I personally like to chop off the ends. I'm going to assume many of you have some sense of how to chop vegetables. I also feel like something like a sweet potato is just sometimes kind of awkward. But if anybody needs some tips, you always want to make sure you've got a flat surface on the vegetable as quickly as possible, so that you don't have something rolling around. I was actually a dum-dum, and even though I pride myself on my knife skills, I wasn't paying attention the other evening while I was chopping off the end of an onion and totally sliced my finger as it rolled around. So be careful. Now is an especially bad time to end up in the hospital. Not that you ever want stitches, they're awful. So you want about 3/4 of a cup, 3/4 of an inch dice or whatever on these. And so here again, you don't have to be super precise. So I've got basically, it's not super large sweet potato. I cut it into little strips like this, and now I'm about to slice them lengthwise, and now I'm just going to cut across. The main way I think about the sizing when I'm making a chili is, what do I want to eat? So whatever a recipe says, sometimes they say weird things. You want it to be tasty to you. That's what's most important. So I'm going to keep chopping for a second. I'll be right back. All right. So we're going to keep up with some chopping here. Again, flat surfaces. For the thicker parts, I'll do as safe a job as I can of trying to get something a little bit narrower. And then just, again, use my judgment as far as the sizing of something I actually want to eat. So you can kind of see here, if you judge relative to my hand, those are smaller pieces. Sorry, I'm going to move the preview over. But they're also not all uniform. I am not a professional chef, so I'm not going to beat myself up about that. I do always think that with chopping, it's kind of a funny balance too between what feels safe and what feels efficient. I don't know. Chopping's one of my favorite things. I find it really relaxing. Having a nice sharp knife is an important piece of that equation though, which I highly recommend investing in one and keeping it sharp and well honed, but that's probably another video that I am probably not the best person to do. Also, shameless PSA, you obviously should be washing your hands frequently throughout this process and should have disinfected your kitchen ahead of time. That's kind of always a best practice, but particularly in these crazy times. All right. I am going to go ahead and grab my pan. So in order to roast, we are going to use a rimmed baking sheet. I like to line with aluminum foil because I don't like cleaning things up. And the recipe says to toss the sweet potatoes in 2 tablespoons of olive oil and then spread them out. But why use an extra bowl when I can just put the olive oil on the potatoes directly? I don't typically measure my olive oil either. I just kind of do what looks like enough. That also goes along well with the fact that, like I said earlier, I don't necessarily stress too much if I want to use 3 versus, 3 sweet potatoes or 2 small ones or something like that. And you want to spread out in one layer. Best thing about cooking is it doesn't have to be super organized. And then we're going to throw some salt over it and then roast for 20 minutes. The oven's already preheated. Alexa, set a timer for 20 minutes. All right, now that we've got the sweet potatoes in the oven, we're gonna chop up the onion. If I weren't lazy, we would also be chopping some garlic, probably about 2 cloves, depending on your preference, but I am lazy and it is extreme times, so I'm using jar garlic today, which I'll talk about in a minute. There's probably much better videos than I can provide in terms of theories about how to best chop an onion. Flat surfaces again. Deal with that later. I actually tend to use my sink a lot as a place to throw stuff unless I have a bowl out. Sometimes with onion skins, especially if I'm making a lot of my own food like I am right now, I will actually save them, throw them in a freezer bag, and then once I've got kind of a collection of veggie scraps, I will use it for making stock. And if I had been thinking, that's what I would have done with the peelings from the sweet potatoes as well. I made some delicious stock that we'll talk about in a little bit 2 days ago from a variety of like root vegetable scraps and onion scraps and some celery that was borderline about to go sad, but like wasn't yet guilty and stuff. So anyway, onion peel in here. So here again, we're going for what we actually want in our chili. So some people would tell you that in a chili you actually want pretty small onion dices. I think that's a matter of personal preference. I kind of like a chunky chili, but you do you. Fun fact, I think there's some variety of opinion on this, but I personally really want to preserve the edge of my knife, so I'll use the other side of my chef's knife to move stuff around on my cutting board. All right, so my onion's ready, my garlic's ready, now we're gonna go to the stove. We're gonna see how this goes. Got the GoPro on the head. So I'm starting out with an enameled cast iron pot. I really like the enameled cast iron for all sorts of things. It's a Dutch oven, as you might be able to see if I kind of go in from the side. It's heavy, it takes a little bit to heat up, but once it's warm, it retains heat really well. The enameling means you can put tomatoes in it. I don't know if you know this, but with cast iron, you really shouldn't have like unenameled cast iron exposed to anything highly acidic like a tomato. So once your olive oil is pretty warm, I've got it on medium-high heat on a pretty high burner, or pretty hot burner. I'm actually gonna turn it down closer to medium. We're gonna saute the onions, garlic, cumin, pimenton, which I just use paprika, and chili powder. So this is basically all the spices and aromatic vegetables. Like I mentioned earlier, I've chopped my onion, but I've got some pre-chopped garlic. So onion with the pre-chopped stuff. Just sort of eyeball it again. I want basically the equivalent of 2 cloves if you're following the recipe exactly. I also happen to really like garlic. And then here too, if you want to use measuring spoons, you can. You're looking for about a teaspoon of cumin, which is possibly my favorite spice. And yes, I did wash my hands again before doing this. And then about a half teaspoon each of pimenton or paprika. It calls for sweet. I'm using hot, a rebel. I have both. I just think spicy should be chili. Chili should be spicy. And then we're going to do a big pinch of salt, or the shaken equivalent. If you're experienced with cooking, you'll know this, but if you're not, this might be helpful. You'll kind of figure out as you go how much salt, for example, is the right amount of salt for you, or how much oil is enough with your pan and the types of vegetables that you're using for the results that you're trying to achieve. The main thing I would encourage you to do is not stress it if you get it a little bit wrong from the recipe. Like last night I was making the beans that you'll see me use later and put in 5 tablespoons, I think, of olive oil, or close to 5 tablespoons of olive oil in my Instant Pot, when I actually should have only used 2. It'll be fine. A little extra omega-3 never killed anybody. Well, that might not entirely be true with fat, but sorry. My bad. Anyway, so we're going to saute this for a little bit. You're looking to get it nice and... You want it to smell good. It does. Sorry, there's not smell-o-vision. And then we'll let this go for about 8 to 10 minutes. Stirring pretty often, but not like constantly. And the whole point is to get it soft and not too browned. We're just basically looking to release and meld the flavors a little bit. So as you can see, I kind of Don't mess with it. Leave it alone. I like bamboo utensils because they're environmentally sustainable, and then I also find they just don't tend to retain a ton of heat or anything like that. I throw them in the dishwasher. I'm not sure if I was supposed to, but I've been doing it for years, and I think I've had these for 10 years or something. All right, we'll be back when the 8 to 10 minutes is up. So while things saute, oh dear. It's amazing how quickly things can go from totally fine to silly. So I'm gonna turn the heat down. It's basically just the spices that are burning here. As you can see, the onions are not burned, thank goodness. And I'm not gonna freak out because a little bit of charred spice won't hurt me. And the extent to which it's kind of baked onto the pan will be taken care of when we put the tomatoes in. So you can see it's already starting to thicken up a little bit. Get a little bit of that like almost gooiness to it. As long as I don't burn it, that'll continue. So meanwhile, the sweet potatoes should be ready. So this is what they look like after the prescribed time. The best way with a root vegetable that I've found to figure out if it's done or not is to take a fork and see if it goes easily through a piece, like one of your larger pieces. I'm not sure I would say that was like going easily through. So what I'm gonna do, especially because normally I remember to set the timer for halfway through and toss them a little bit midway, which might have helped them being done on time. Toss things around. Get it back out into one layer. And then throw it back in the oven. Try not to burn myself. Oops. Alexa, set a timer for 5 minutes. So I basically only use Alexa as a voice timer. It's my favorite thing with, I love how much easier she makes timer setting in kitchens. I haven't entirely figured out how to get her to do multiple timers at once very effectively, but it's really nice when I'm doing something like this not to have to like interrupt my flow and go start a timer. All right, I'll be back in a couple minutes when this and the sweet potatoes have come along. We're gonna call this good, both because they're soft and it's starting to get pretty brown. The next step is to add the turkey, which I'm gonna do with a silicone spatula. As much as I generally trust that the bamboo gets fully washed in the dishwasher, a little paranoid. So, threw the turkey in. Now, this is ground turkey. The recipe says preferably dark meat. I'm using extra lean white meat. So sometimes that means that the cooking will proceed a little bit differently from how they recommend. That's part of why I used a little bit of extra olive oil too, is there's less fat in the meat itself, so having a little extra fat in the pan otherwise will hopefully help. We're just gonna be cooking it, stirring every now and then to break it up until liquid has been released and the meat is nicely browned. That'll actually take a good 20 minutes. We'll have plenty of time to kind of break it up as we go. It also gets easier actually to break up the less raw that it is. So we're gonna stop looking at this raw meat because that's not my favorite thing to do, and I will give you a couple glimpses as we go into what this looks like. Okay, now this is a little bit more than a simmer, but as we said earlier, we don't care. I've got my tomatoes pretty well crushed up. I can kind of keep stabbing at them if I want to, or pushing them up against the sides of the pot. There's plenty more time left because there's another 15 minutes of simmering left once we put in the sweet potatoes and the black beans. So the sweet potatoes, obviously you've already got ready to go. The nice thing about using the foil is also that you would be able to just grab and go. Okay. So that's the sweet potatoes. And then for the beans, you can just use 1 can of black beans. You'd want to drain and rinse them in something like a colander. I, however, am a nut, and I have an Instant Pot and dried beans, and they taste amazing compared to canned beans. Like, canned beans are good, and I think that the homemade from dry beans are even better, and especially with the recipe that I use, which I'm happy to share a link to separately. We can talk about that another time. But since I made my own, I'm just gonna basically put a couple scoopfuls in. It's roughly a can's worth. I actually really like beans, so especially these, and I think they'll add a nice layer of flavor to things. One thing to keep in mind is that if you're vegetarian and you wanted to alter this to not include the turkey, you obviously would have been able to skip the longer turkey step. And I would recommend doubling, like probably just using a big can of black beans, or reducing the sweet potato, or just playing around. Like maybe you like a high sweet potato to bean ratio or whatever. You also could use something like soy rizo or crumbled tofu of some sort or whatever. There's a lot of different ways you can go. I'll put some more notes about some vegetarian mods in the eventual post that will accompany this as well. So you're going to add your beans and sweet potatoes, give it a nice stir. It's already on simmer, so we're just going to leave it there, and then I'm going to set a timer for 15 minutes with the help of Alexa. Alexa, set a timer for 15 minutes.
15 minutes, starting now.
Cool. All right. I'm not going to time lapse this because this one is pretty boring to watch. It's literally just simmering, looking exactly the same the whole time. But we'll be back to call it done and plate. Here we are. It is ready. So I've turned off the burner, and it's really complicated from here. Take a ladle, or if you don't have a ladle, one thing I like to use is a cup, measuring cup, because they're kind of the same. Bowl. Stir chili. One more stir. Oh, and I was tasting throughout the last simmer, which you might want to do as well. Gives you a chance to add a little salt or whatever, if that's your preference. Voila. Chili is ready. Thanks. I'll post the recipe too. Hope you enjoyed.